Ports do not sleep. They only change which lies they tell between midnight and market. I woke on patience to the scrape of bumboats and a rooster that had no business sounding that proud on a spit of sand and sin. Harbour light came dirty through the companionway, yellow as old fat. My hammock hooks held. The book held flatter against my ribs, cooler than at sea, as if river water and crowded piers were a climate that made law cautious. Article 1 still sat easy in my lungs, captain of my breath. The rest of the spent, pale lines from the open water week lay quiet as healed cuts. I did not open the clasp. Mourning in a loose-tongued town is for ears first, blood later. On deck, the mate already wore his agent face, scraped clean and slightly too bright. He had the company papers under one arm and a list of damages under the other. The boatswain drove boys at the washing of bloodstains that were not quite blood anymore, only brown lessons in the grain. The gunner sat on a carriage truck and counted cartridge paper with the devotion of a priest who trusts numbers more than prayers. Job stretched until his shoulders cracked and grinned at me like carnival had already begun under his skin. I took a line and made myself useful in the ordinary way. Useful is camouflage that still pays. Informal lead did not clock out at anchor. Men still glanced for my nod when work went messy. I answered like weather and left the mate's mouth room to own the echo. Owners' agents love echoes that sound like chain of command. The harbour clerk from yesterday returned with a second man who had the soft hands of someone who writes other people's futures. They wanted the mate in the cabin. They wanted the boatswain's account of the boarding. They wanted, almost as an afterthought, the hand called Cal who had been useful in the storm talk. My name had dried in ink overnight. Ink ashore is a different deep law. It does not need blood. It only needs repetition. I went because refusing would have written aloud a sentence. In the cabin, I gave ordinary answers with ordinary gaps. I pulled rope, sang the lead, hit a man who needed hitting, slept when work allowed. The soft hands paused on the words storm-born and asked who first used them. I said, drunk men name weather after anyone still standing. He smiled without warmth. Drunk men also name devils, he said. We prefer weather. I preferred he keep preferring weather. Under my shirt, the book ticked once. Not hungry, attentive, like a hound that has smelled a court without yet seeing the judge. I kept my face plain and my tar stains visible. Tar is a better character reference than speeches. When they released me, the sun had climbed enough to make the harbour stink honestly. Job waited by the rail with 2 oranges bought off a bumboat with coin that had been bonus yesterday and temptation today. He tossed me one. I peeled it and let the bright sting wipe the cabin taste out of my mouth. Across the water, the Navy tender's watch changed with theatre. White gaiters, clean muskets, eyes that practice suspicion the way we practiced knots. Bosun wants a shore party list, Job said. He put you on it and scowled like he was doing you a disservice. I told him scowls are how he blesses. Job's burned palm was a pale map now, healing. He flexed it around the orange and said the seed joke without saying seed. Ready to see which dirt takes root. He nodded. Patience would keep a watch. The mate would keep his agents. Pike and Wren and the other 2 would keep their cells or their ropes depending on how the town's mood and the Crown's paperwork danced. Deferred accounts do not vanish because the ledger moves ashore. They only change currency. I went below during the scramble of the first approved leave and checked the book's binding in the cable tier's familiar stink, now mixed with harbour damp. Pencil laws on the cover edge still legible. Never show the book. Never write what you cannot survive if it rebounds. Claim a deck before you try to rule a sea. Leave enough ordinary struggle showing. Do not burn the crew as fuel. Informal is not invisible. I added nothing. Ports punish new ink the way reefs punish pride. I only breathed and felt Article 1 answer. Clean air in a dirty town, and told the leather without writing that greater decks still waited, and this noise was a door, not a throne. On deck again, the mate pressed a few more coins into my hand with the air of a man buying continued competence. Stay clear of the Navy tables, he said. Stay clear of politics. Bring your back tomorrow. I said yes to all 3 and meant the third. The first 2 would be harder. Politics in a port like this was not speeches. It was who bought whose story before noon. The boatswain caught me at the gangway. Ear still ugly, eyes still a fence. "Do not get hanged in a pretty way," he said. "Third time of our acquaintance, now almost tradition." I told him I preferred ugly survival. He grunted, which was as close as he came to affection, and added that if I found men talking storm-born miracles, I was to break the talk with work or walk away before the talk grew a spine. I promised him the walk. Promises to boatswains are cheaper than promises to books, and somehow heavier. Job and I went down into the boat with 4 other hands and a cox who knew which landing took bribes in fruit and which took them in silence. Oars bit brown water. Patience shrank behind us into a tired geometry of mast and patch. Cradle, I thought again, not throne. The town rose ahead in heat and colour, and the particular music of places that have decided law is a customer, not a master. Loose tongues were already awake. I could hear them in the shout of prices, in the laugh that lasted too long, in the sudden quiet when our Navy-adjacent brig's boat touched the steps. I stepped onto wet stone with ordinary boots and an ordinary grin, and a second heart of law ticking hired patience onto plain cloth. Called a vein, Cal to the careless. 19. Should have drowned, did not. Walking now into a market that sold fruit, rope, women, lies, and names, and I intended to buy only what I could carry without hanging twice. The port smelled like the future. The future smelled like smoke, sugar, and someone already saying my name wrong for money. Ashore, paper has teeth. At sea, paper is a suggestion that burns well in a calm. In a colonial port, paper is a second weather system, and it does not care if you can hand, reef, and steer. The landing steps were slick with old fish and new ambition. We climbed into a street that was mostly a negotiation between mud, planks, and goats. Signs hung in 3 languages and 1 dialect of pure threat. Job walked half a pace off my shoulder, carnival still in his grin, eyes counting exits. Company agents kept an office above a chandler who sold rope that had already lived 2 lives. We were not headed there first. The mate had gone ahead with his damaged indigo story and his need to be believed. We were free bodies with coin and orders to return sober enough to pull. Freedom in a port is a short leash made of curiosity. I used mine to listen. Job's shoulder touched mine, not accident. I bought 2 plantains I did not want and asked the seller, mild, who paid him to season fruit with ghosts. He showed empty hands and a hurt face that was almost convincing. "No pay," he said. "Only talk. Talk is free until it finds a clerk." We moved on. I peeled the plantain and ate without tasting, so my hands had a story. Ordinary hunger, ordinary boy. Under the shirt, the book stayed cool, almost sulking, as if it disliked being near so many competing authorities. Crown, company, church, market, pirate custom humming under all of them like a second tide. Claimable deck felt far away and somehow closer, because every hull in the basin was a maybe if you had nerve and witnesses and a night without too many muskets. A militia pair drifted past with bored eyes and active palms. They stopped a sailor from another ship for the crime of walking while interesting. I made my walk dull. Dull is a craft. Job learned it fast. Carnival dimmed to a working man's amble. We turned into a narrower lane where laundry dripped on our heads and a woman sold ink and quills from a tray, which felt like a joke aimed at my ribs. The mate found us near a pump with his agent face cracking at the edges. "Good news," he said, in the tone of men who have just agreed to be underpaid. "The company will claim the cargo and repair a house. Wages posted in 3 days if the clerk's arithmetic survives dinner." Bad news thinner in his mouth. Navy office wants a fuller statement on the mutiny attempt. Names, times, who led the defense, who broke the nose of the tall one. "Pike," I said. Job said, low, that storm-born talk was already a second crew walking beside us. "I know," I said. "We do not chase it, we starve it." "How?" he asked. "By being boring in public and precise in private," I said, "and by finding who feeds the fruit seller before the fruit seller feeds a noose." We circled back toward the water because water still made more sense than streets. Along the quay, a row of cages held men who had lost arguments with paperwork. Not Pike's set. Those would be deeper in the fort's stone stomach or the jail's wet basement. These were small debtors and cup purses, displayed as civic interior decoration. A woman spat at the bars and missed on purpose. A preacher missed on purpose the other way, aiming salvation and hitting air. I watched the watchers. One man in a coat too clean for the fish smell stood long enough to memorize faces, then drifted. Listening coat, I filed him. Job saw him too. That one pays for names, Job said. Or both, Job said. Ports invent jobs like that. I felt the chapter's promise tighten a notch. Spies, almost exposed. A Navy snitch somewhere in the weave, not yet named, already breathing the same humid air. Clever would have to mean quiet. Quiet kills last longer in the mouth of a town than loud justice. Back at the landing, we found two of Patience's boys already drunk enough to sing the boarding as if it had been a dance. I cut the song with a laugh and a shove toward shade and watered their rum story down to sweat and luck before a marine's ear could take notes. The bosun's warning lived in my hands. Break the talk, walk away, starve the myth. Myths are just articles written by crowds, and crowds do not care who rebounds when the clause snaps. The soft-handed man from the cabin appeared at the quay with a folded paper and a smile like a closed ledger. Additional signature, he said to me. Confirmation you stand by your account. I signed Cal Vane in a hand that looked less educated than I am, a small disguise among many. He sanded the ink. Papers that bite do not always draw blood on the first chew. Sometimes they wait until you forget you are in their mouth. When the boat took us back to Patience for the afternoon work bill, the brig looked smaller and more honest than the town. I climbed aboard glad of tar and order. The gunner asked if Shaw had improved my soul. I told him Shaw had inventoried it. He spat over the side and said, "Inventories belong to men who die in beds." I did not argue. I took my place on a repair gang and let my shoulders shake where men could see them shake. Fourth personal law. Ordinary struggle showing. The book stayed shut. The port's teeth stayed for the hour in the paper and not in my throat. Evening would bring leave again for some. Evening would bring lanterns and looser tongues. Evening would bring the listening coat back into some doorway, patient as mold. I breathed as captain of my breath and tasted orange peel still ghosting my fingers, bright over the harbor's rot, and told myself the only signature that mattered long-term was still waiting on a deck I had not yet claimed, written in blood I had not yet spent, witnessed by men who chose shares over wages and silence over sale. Until then, I would feed the file only sawdust and keep the true grain under cloth. Night leave tastes different when you have decided the ship under you is a cradle you will set down. The bosun's list put Job and me ashore with the gunner's mate and a quiet topman named Merrick, who chewed tobacco as if it owed him money. We had coin enough for drink and not enough for stupidity if stupidity charged full price. The mate's last look said, "Come back." The bosun's last look said, "Come back useful." I filed both and followed the smell of fried fish and cane spirit into the town's louder throat. Job chose the second tavern, not the first. First taverns are for men who want to be found. Second taverns are for men who want to hear who is looking. This one had a low beam that punished the tall, a floor that remembered every spill since the last peace treaty, and a woman behind the board who could count lies by the way a cup was set down. We took a corner where the wall met the wall, and the exit stayed plural. "To the drink," Job said, and clinked cheap tin against my cheap tin. I drank enough to be a person among persons, and not enough to lend my tongue to the room. Article 1 made sobriety cheaper than it looked. Breath steady, head clear, the cane spirit still burned. Burning is allowed, stupidity is optional. Around us, men told boarding stories with improved body counts. Someone swore teacher's smoke had been seen from a masthead 3 nights east, a pillar like a judgment with a vanity streak. Someone else said amnesty was a net with a hole cut for friends of the governor. Merrick listened with his jaw. The gunner's mate watched hands near knives out of professional habit. Job leaned in. "Seed," he said. He named 2 from Patience without moving his lips much. A sailmaker who hated owners on principle. A young hand who had brought me tangled mine and learned to love the untangling. He did not name the bosun. He did not name the gunner. Walls are not seeds. Walls stay with the house. I agreed without speaking. Agreement can be a nod that looks like keeping time with a fiddle. A man at the next table was selling a different crop. Shares talk. Beach talk. A sloop named something pretty with guns that were less pretty, looking for men who preferred division to wages. His accent was island and his eyes were arithmetic. I let Job do the smiling. I did the measuring. Claimable deck begins as rumor before it becomes wood under blood. This might be nothing. This might be the first plank. I did not lean in hungry. Hungry looks like prey or like a recruiter, and both get remembered. The woman at the board caught my eye once and looked away too fast. Recognition without introduction. Maybe I was already a silhouette in someone else's story. Stormborn, useful liar, bottles opposite. I scratched a mosquito bite on my wrist and made a face at the drink. Theatre of the ordinary. Merrick went to find a privy and came back thinner in the mouth. Man outside asking for the patience, boys, he said. Clean coat, soft question. I stood without scraping the stool. Job's hand brushed the table edge, ready. We did not bolt. Bolting writes guilt in letters tall enough for militia. We paid, tipped just enough, and left through the side door that smelled of urine and onions, then looped through 2 lanes and a yard where chickens argued politics. We took the long way toward the water and stopped under a balcony where a lantern made honest shadows. Job said the seed wanted ground that was not already planted with Clerks. I said ground first requires not dying in the survey. He grinned. Carnival cracked back open and asked if I ever got tired of speaking like a closed box. I told him closed boxes keep powder dry. He said powder is for later. Tonight is for knowing who sells weather by the cup. We tried a third place, smaller, almost a kitchen with ambitions. There the talk was lower and more useful. A caulker spoke of a schooner in the outer roads with a sick captain and a crew one bad night from choosing a new religion of shares. A woman mending nets spoke of a navy clerk who paid for pirate names in silver that had already been stolen once. She did not look at me when she said it. She looked at Job, which meant she had chosen her messenger. Job bought her a cup and learned the clerk liked the tavern with the green door near the fort ditch after the second bell of the night watch. Green door, fort ditch, second bell. I did not write it down. Memory is a quieter book. On the walk back toward the landing, Merrick asked if we were in trouble. I told him we were in a port. He accepted that as theology. The gunner's mate said trouble was just work wearing a different shirt. I liked him for that and still did not recruit him aloud. Aloud is a witness you cannot unswear. Patience's lanterns looked like home and like a question. We climbed aboard under the bosun's count. He smelled our breath, found it with intolerance, and told us the morning would hurt if we deserved it. Job saluted with 2 fingers and collapsed into his hammock, still half laughing at nothing. I sat in my sailcloth corner with the fid in easy reach and the book a warm rectangle now, port coolness giving way to the old sea attention, as if the hull reminded it what kind of lore it preferred. I opened the clasp under blanket and stub light, no larger than a sin. Pages. Article 1. Spent ghosts hiring coal. I did not write a port article. Dry land had already bitten with paper. I only whispered the chapter's shape to the dark. Loose tongues, spies, almost exposed, still waiting like a shoal under brown water. A snitch out there buying weather. Men who might choose. A deck not yet named. Job snored once, corrected himself, snored better. Around us, patience creeped her harbour creek, shorter and more social than open water talk. I closed the book, bound it, set it home, and slept in pieces the way men sleep when the next day's threats have not yet chosen their faces. I turned over, cheek to sailcloth, and let the harbour's distant fiddle scrape me back under. Drink with Job, paid. Seed watered with caution. The port kept talking in its sleep. So did I, once. A single word I did not admit later, even to myself. Shares. Information is a tide. You do not own it. You stand in it at the right hour and try not to drown in what you came to catch. Second bell of the night watch found me ashore again without Job, which was unkind and necessary. Job's carnival face was memorable. Mine could still pass for any wiry hand with tar under the nails if I kept the grin small and the walk borrowed from tired men. I told the deck officer I was fetching a parcel for the carpenter, a lie the carpenter would back because I had already paid him in advance with help on a stubborn seam and a promise of more hands tomorrow. Debts stacked quietly beat speeches stacked loud. The fort ditch smelled of standing water and old powder washed out of uniforms. The green door was exactly as ugly as hope. paint peeled in scabs, light leaked under in a thin gold line. Inside, a room tried to be private and succeeded only at being small. 3 tables, one man alone with a cup and a ledger smaller than a Bible and twice as sure of itself. Coat clean, hands soft enough, the listening coat from the cages, or his brother in the same trade. "Patience Brigg," he said, not a question. "There is a man in the fort cells who will trade a name for a softer rope," the clerk said. "Pike. He is being careful so far. Careful men break in chapters. When he breaks, the file thickens. You could thicken it first and choose the angle of the light." I told him Pike was a thief and I was a hand, and miracles were what drunks called preventer lines. I told him I wanted coin for real news, like which patrol sloop left on the morning tide, and whether the schooner in the outer roads was as sick as her captain's colour. He wrote nothing. Disappointment flickered. Then professional patience returned. He gave me a crumb about the patrol to keep the line fishing, and a warning dressed as kindness. Men who stop mutinies draw 2 kinds of interest: owner's interest, Navy interest. One pays wages, the other pays attention. Attention is heavier. On the dark walk to the landing, I checked 3 times for soft-footed company and found only a dog with higher morals than half the port. The book under my shirt felt warmer, sea memory waking as I neared the basin. I thought of writing a narrow clause against listening ears and rejected it so hard my teeth clicked. Wide, stupid. Rebound would be a town of deaf men or a town of men who heard only me. Either one a miracle parade. Secrecy or hang twice. The personal laws still rode my wrist without ink. Patience took me back aboard like a mother who does not ask where you have been because she already hates the answer. The carpenter grunted when I passed, our lie intact. Job sat up in his hammock as if he had not been sleeping at all. "Green Door is a clerk with a ledger and Navy manners," I said. "He is buying weather. Pike is inventory he expects to ripen. My name is already on the shelf." Job cursed softly in a language that made the curse prettier. "What now?" "And the seed," Job said. "Seed waits until the snitch is a closed account," I said. "Planting while a man sells water rights to your dirt is how farms burn." Job lay back. "You speak like an old thief." "I am 19, I said. "The book is older." Morning work came mean and bright. I took my shake of shoulders to the repair gang and let rumour come to me without chasing. Stormborn had reached a bumboat girl who giggled it at the rail until the boatswain's glare killed the giggle. A landsman asked me if I blessed knots. I told him I blessed sweat and showed him a blister. Blisters are anti-legend. The mate pulled me aside and said the Navy office might send a man to walk the ship. "Be dull," he said. "I am always dull," I said. He looked at me as if he wanted to believe that and could not quite afford to. Near noon, a longboat with clean paint came alongside, and a midshipman with a peach-fuzz chin and old eyes asked polite questions on deck, while his older shadow, a master's mate with a scar like a second smile, watched reactions more than answers. I hauled on a line in plain sight and answered when pointed at. Yes, no. The mate led, the crew held. Grapnels failed because the hull was greasy and the angle was bad. Luck, preventers, bosun habit. I gave them the catechism of the ordinary until the peach chin looked bored and the scar looked unconvinced but full of other errands. They left. The deck exhaled. Job flicked me a look that said, "Almost." Almost is the word ports live on. Almost exposed, almost rich, almost hanged. I breathed out through my nose and tasted tar. In the cable tier at the heat hour, I opened the black article and ran a dry thumb along the margin. No new blood, no new clause. I spoke without ink. I need clever more than power today. The leather did not argue. Hiring coal still glowed. Greater decks, greater articles, appetite is a tiller. I kept my hands on the real work and my ears on the Green Door's wake. By evening, I had a name for the runner, pulled from the net-mending woman through Job's charm and a coin. She called him Crow when she was angry, and Elias when she was selling him. Elias Crow, thin, quick, liked dice and other people's secrets, carried the Clark's silver and sometimes carried stories to a second buyer if the first was slow. Double agent of the alley kind, not the grand kind. Perfect. Double agents trip on their own feet if you grease the right plank. Loose tongues had given me a person. Persons can be outplayed. Ledgers are harder. Crow first. Then the file's teeth might dull enough for a man to walk away free and claim what he came to claim. The sea beyond the bar waited, indifferent and honest. The port waited, interested and false. Between them I stood with a book, a breath, and a runner's name. And for the first time since anchors bit, I felt the tilt of informal lead turn into something sharper. Not command, hunt. The fort's stone stomach held men the way a shark holds air before a bite. Not forever, just long enough. Getting in cost me a lie, a coin, and the mate's sealed note saying I was to identify stolen tools among the prisoner's effects for company inventory. The mate signed because I asked in the language of cargo and because informal lead still made his pen move before his doubts finished dressing. The sergeant at the inner gate looked bored enough to be dangerous and let me through when the silver made a soft friend of his palm. Bored men invent hobbies. Bribes are a hobby that keeps other hobbies from involving your ribs. Pike sat on a bench with 3 other futures and a nose that had settled into its new geography. Wren slept with his mouth open, teeth still missing from the magazine night. The other 2 played a game with pebbles that had no rules I could see and all the intensity of last bets. Pike saw me and did not stand. Standing is hope. He conserved. Inventory, I said, loud enough for the minder, then softer. When the minder's eyes glazed on a fly, you are ripening on a clerk's shelf. He expects you to sell weather. Pike's gaze sharpened. I have sold nothing that bleeds, he said. Yet. Soft rope is a song they sing to open mouths. I prefer breathing songs. I think your tongue steers your neck, I said. And I think a runner named Crow will try to hurry your seasons. If he comes, sell him the mate's bottle and my hard head, and nothing that glows. Why help me? Pike asked, genuine curiosity cutting the oil. Job waited in the shade of a cart with fruit he was not eating. Well, he said. He is still careful, I said. Careful is a rope that frays. Crow will pull it. Then we pull Crow first, Job said. We. The word sat between us heavier than the fruit. Seed becoming stem. I did not correct him. We spent the afternoon on patience looking dull, while the master's mate with the scar came back without the peach chin and walked our deck like a man counting ghosts. He asked the gunner about the magazine night. The gunner gave him powder doctrine and a stare that suggested further questions might find a rammer. He asked the boatswain about grapnels. The boatswain gave him angles, grease, and a short course in why boarding hooks fail when men panic and hulls roll. He asked me nothing this time. He only stood near enough that I could smell his pipe and feel his attention like a hand hovering over a chess piece. When he left, the mate wiped his face and said he thought we had survived. Survived is a word that expires hourly in ports. Near the dog watch, a bumboat brought not fruit but a boy with a folded scrap for Cal of the Patience. No seal, no name. Inside, in a quick, ugly hand, Crow dice at the lantern crab after dark. He fells your weather to 2 buyers. One wears green door, one wears no door you know. Price rising. I showed Job. He whistled low. 2 buyers means Crow is a fire with 2 mouths, he said. Put him out carefully, or the smoke goes everywhere. Job studied my face. You have a look. Night work on a ship at anchor is honest. I took a turn at the harbour watch and listened to water slap and distant music and the Navy tender's bell keeping a cleaner time than our own. The book ticked once against my ribs, impatient as a second heart that wants exercise. I denied it blood, skill first, ink later. Still the religion. Port had not revoked it. Port had only made ink more expensive. Below, in a scrap of privacy, I checked my small kit. Fid, knife, coin, a length of light line. A cheap ring I had won off a drunk in a different port in a different life. Useful as planted shine. Tools of ordinary sin. No article yet. If I needed law, it would have to be narrow enough to fit a single runner's bad night without rewriting the town. Pike's face stayed with me while I coiled the line. Deferred account, mock salute. He might hold, he might not. If Crow reached him with soft rope music and 2 buyers silver, careful would become a story about a boy and a book, and then hanging twice would stop being a proverb and start being a schedule. I slept after watch in the thin way of men who have already begun the hunt in their muscles. Once I woke sure someone had touched the packet under my shirt and found only my own hand guarding it in sleep. Secrecy is a posture. Even unconscious, the body learns. Dawn made the harbour look almost innocent, which is the meanest trick light pulls. I stood at the rail with coffee that had lost the argument with chicory and watched bomb boats gather like flies with oars. Somewhere in the stone, Pike breathed through his new nose. Somewhere behind a green door, a clerk opened a ledger. Somewhere Elias Crow counted dice and prices and believed himself the smartest thin man in a fat town. Job bumped my shoulder. "Lantern crab tonight," he said. "Not alone, not alone," I agreed. "But you stay where you can swear you saw me drinking like a fool while other men do uglier math. Witnesses of the wrong story are better than partners in the right crime." He frowned, then understood, then hated understanding, then nodded. Friendship is a series of nods that hurt. The day stretched. I filled it with tar, rope, dull answers, and the public religion of sweat. Informal lead hummed. Boys brought tangled line. The mate asked my preference on a stowage question, and I redirected to the carpenter's craft until preference became competence again. The scarred master's mate did not return. His absence itched worse than his pipe. When the sun finally bled out behind the fort, I put the cheap ring in my pocket, the light line inside my shirt beside the book like a second bad idea, and went to find how a loose-tongued port teaches runners to drown in their own market. Pike In Stone had given me a deadline without meaning to. Crow's rising price had given me a target. The chapter's promise had given me the shape of the blade. Now I only had to cut without becoming the story the fruit seller would sell tomorrow with the plantains. The lantern crab hung over a side canal where the water moved just enough to claim it was not a ditch. Red light bled through greased paper. Dice clicked like insects with opinions. The air inside was sweat, smoke, lime, and the particular optimism of men who believe the next throw rewrites blood. I went in alone with Job parked 2 doors down in a noodle stall, visible if I needed a witness of the fool drinking story, and absent if I needed clean hands in the official version. Layers. Ports are won in layers. Crow was easy to find once you knew the thinness. Elbows sharp, smile quick, dice cup dancing. I took a wall stool and lost small coin until my face became furniture. Between throws he sold sparks. A brig storm-born boy who made hooks slip. He used weather first, then a buyer pressed, and Crow said cow as if tasting a coin's edge. Price rising. I felt the book go cold and tight, a warning without words. Almost exposed was no longer a shoal. It was a man with dice saying my short name to strangers for sport and silver. Secrecy is a hull. Hulls crack 1 plank at a time. Near midnight the dice cooled. Crow pocketed more than he left, clapped backs, and slid toward the rear door with a thick man who wore no door on his face, only appetite. Second buyer's muscle. I counted to 30, left coin on the table, and went out the front into humid dark, then around. Job's noodle stall was empty of Job, which meant he had seen the exit and moved to the agreed angle without being asked. Good seed. The back alley was narrow enough to make shoulders into decisions. Water glistened black at the end where the ditch path began. Crow walked half-turned, talking with his hands, the thick man listening like a safe listens to a key. I did not jump them. Jumping is a story with 2 losers and a patrol. I paralleled on the higher path behind laundry lines. Soft feet, breath owned. Article 1 earning its keep in silence and steady lungs. They stopped under a broken awning. Silver changed hands. Words changed sharper. I caught pieces. Patience. Mutiny. Book. The last word hit my sternum harder than the silver would have. Book. Not weather. Book. Pike's careful was already leaking, or Crow was inventing elevation to raise price, or someone else had seen me in a cable tier and sold the silhouette. Any of the 3 was a rope. The thick man asked where the book lived. Crow laughed and said under a boy's shirt if stupid, under pride if clever, and either way the Crown paid more for a live pointer than a dead rumour. Live costs double, Crow added, and a boat out if the Navy clerk gets jealous. Arrogant arithmetic. I could have written then, thumb, blood, a narrow, ugly clause about tongue seizing on the word book. I did not. Rebound in a town of talkers might silence the wrong throats or brand mine as the only mouth that worked. Skill first. Grease the plank. I moved ahead of them, dropped into the ditch path's choke where boards narrowed over drowning water, and became a drunk looking for a wall. When Crow and the thick man reached me, I was vomiting theatrically into the ditch, blocking the boards with the helpless authority of sickness. Crow cursed. The thick man shoved. I reeled into Crow with apology and hands that were not as drunk as my voice, and in the tangle, the cheap ring found Crow's purse-string pocket, and the light line found a hitch around his ankle that would only matter if someone ran on wet boards. Planted shine. Future trip. I let the thick man fling me aside into mud. I lay laughing drunk apologies while they stepped over and on, Crow calling me a bilge rat, the thick man already thinking about double prices. Job materialized from the banana trash like a good ghost and hauled me up. "You stink," he whispered. "Theatre," I said. "Purse lighter by a ring that will be found later where it helps. Ankle kissed by line that loves wet wood." Next, we made sure both buyers learn he is selling them to each other. We did not follow all the way to the thick man's door. We followed far enough to know the warehouse lane, then cut back toward the green doors ditch at a run that left my lungs honest and my shirt stuck to the book's oilcloth. I needed the clerk hungry and angry before midnight finished. Hungry, angry clerks make mistakes that look like justice. At the green door, I did not enter. I paid a boy 2 coins to enter for me with a message spoken twice so it would not blur. "Crow is fencing your silver stories to a warehouse man on Miller's Lane and calling your ledger slow. He says it at the Crab every night after you leave. Check his purse for a ring that is not Navy pay. If this works," Job said, "Crow becomes a quarrel between buyers. If this works," I said, "Crow becomes a body the town explains. There's a soft knocking and a face I don't know. Then the door at my back shuts. Then I am not alone, and whatever was behind it has weight, a smell, a patience that is not mine." Job shook his head, half admiration, half fear. "You are colder than the deep that hired you." "I am precise," I said. We took a boat along the quay as drunk seeking another drink. In the warehouse lane, lanterns bobbed. The thick man had Crow by the coat. The clean coat clerk had arrived with 2 militia. Crow was talking fast, juggling knives he himself sharpened. I saw my cheap ring flash in the clerk's fingers as he pulled it from Crow's purse. Accusations flew. Second buyer, green door, double silver, Stormborn as side inventory. My name hit the air again, and I felt Job flinch beside me in the boat. Then Crow, cornered, did the useful stupid thing. He pointed away from both buyers toward the water and screamed that the boy Cal had set him up, that the boy had a devil book, that if they wanted real pay they should drag the patience and strip her hands. I told the oarsman, mild as milk, to take us around the sterns to Patience's far side. No hurry. Job's face was a tight drum. I kept mine ordinary and felt the book tick hard enough to bruise. I was not ready to write wide. Crow had made himself the loudest animal in the lane. Loud animals draw spears. I only had to make sure the spears did not turn toward a wiry hand with a rectangle under his shirt. Lantern Crab had fed me the runner. The alley had greased the plank. Now the port's own teeth would either close on Crow or on me, and the next hour would decide which name the fruit seller sang tomorrow with the plantains. There is a particular silence that follows a man shouting "devil book" in a dark lane. It is not belief, it is appetite deciding whether belief is profitable. Our boat slid along the outer hulls while the lane behind us boiled. I could not see faces anymore. I could hear the shape of argument. Militia wanting a simple thief, Clerk wanting a controlled asset, thick man wanting a prize he could carry to an employer without sharing, Crow wanting air. Air was becoming scarce for him. Good. Scarcity makes men bargain badly. Patience loomed. We paid the oarsman and climbed the chains on the side away from the quay lanterns like men returning from ordinary sin. The watch challenged. I answered with my name and jobs and a joke about noodles. The watch snorted and waved us on. Ordinary sin is expected. Ordinary is a cloak. On deck, I wanted the cable tier and a moment to think with leather in my hands. What I got was the scarred master's mate already aboard, pipe dead in his teeth, talking low with the mate near the binnacle. Navy shadow moves faster than bumboats when a lane shouts magic. Someone had run. Someone always runs. I walked into the light with my shirt hanging plain, book flat, breath owned, shoulders loose. The scar studied me as if I were a chart with a missing reef mark. A man in the warehouse lane just accused you of keeping a devil's articles book and fixing fights with it, he said. He also accused 2 other men of buying your name. Busy night. Care to light any of that? I laughed. Not long, not false enough to ring. I said, Elias Crow sells dice and drama, and tonight his buyers caught him double-dealing, and drowning men invent storms. I said, search me if it helps the paperwork. Then I stood with my arms out in front of half the anchor watch, because refusing a search is a confession in any language. This was the almost, the shirt, the packet, the end of secrecy, or the survival of it, depending on how clever my ordinary looked. The scar stepped in, thorough in the way of men who have found knives in prayer books. Hands along seams, chest. The oilcloth packet was a hardness under linen he could not miss. His palm paused. What is this? He said. Fid block and sewing kit, I said. Sailor's church. I kept my voice bored. Boredom is harder to fake than fear, so I borrowed Article 1's calm and paid for it with a future headache. He pulled the packet free. The deck breathed in. He unwrapped oilcloth under the mate's lantern. Nested inside lay my sewing kit, true enough. Needles, waxed thread, palm thimble, sail patches, and a thin wood backing I had glued 2 nights before. The black article was not there. It was inside my waistband against the small of my back in a second wrap, a contingency practiced until muscle. He ruffled the patches, found nothing, and handed the kit back. Lucky, he said. I am dull, I said. Dull men keep thread. Job, still by the rail, let out a breath he probably did not know he was holding. The mate babbled about good crews and bad lanes and how he would confine shore leave. The scar listened with half an ear, eyes still on me. He had not found a book. He had found a boy prepared for a finding. Prepared is a smell too. He filed it behind his scar and left with a warning that if Crow died talking, more hands would visit. When the navy paint pulled away, I went below on shaking legs I did not show until the cable tier dark covered me. Then I shook. Then I drew the true book from the back wrap and held it so hard the corners bit my palms. Almost the shirt. Secrecy had lived by a finger's width of planning and a sewing kit's honest face. Footsteps, Job's rhythm. He slipped in and sat without asking. He saw the book before I could hide it. For a long breath, neither of us spoke. His eyes were wide and not running. That mattered more than sermons. So, he said finally, not a fid block. No, I said. Is it what Crow screamed, he said. Worse and better, I said. It hires, it collects, it rebounds if you write stupid. Witness, blood, claimable deck. Hang twice if we become a parade. Now you are a witness of a different kind. You can walk away and I will call it sense. Job stared at the leather as if it might bite. Then he laughed once, cracked. Seed, he said. I asked what dirt. Turns out the dirt is a book. He scrubbed his face. I am still here. Do not make me regret the still. I bound the book home against my ribs again, old place, because the waistband contingency had done its job and ribs are where breathing reminds you what Article 1 costs. Job and I sat in bilge stink and harbour damp and rebuilt the plan with one more honest piece on the table between us. Crow had screamed book on a lane full of buyers. Even without proof, the word would travel. Proof is best, but smoke hangs men in towns that love theatre. We needed Crow quieter than smoke, and we needed the quiet to look like his buyer's quarrel, not like Patience's hand. The planted ring had already done work. The ankle line might still wait on some wet board if he ran the ditch path again. The clerk was angry. The thick man was angry. Angry men close accounts with iron if you give them a stage and a shove that does not have your name on the program. I told Job the shove would have to look like the buyer's quarrel, not like Patience's hand. He hated it and agreed. He would be seen loud on the quay with the dull alibi. I would grease the final plank. Witness, I said, touching the book. Blood, deck, not the town, never the town. That is the job, I said. Thank you is a weak word for it. Thank me by not dying, he said, and left me the dark. I climbed back to the deck and took a public drink at the scuttlebutt, where boys could see me looking rattled from navy hands and nothing else. Rattled is human. Then I found the bosun and asked for the ugliest remaining repair job of the night. He gave me a frayed boatful and a look that said he knew something had leaned. Work, his eyes said. Work is the only sermon. Almost exposed, survived by thread and wood and a lie prepared before the searcher was born into my night. The book ticked once, soft, like a second heart impressed despite itself. I grinned at the dark without humor and went to finish what loose tongues had started. Angry men are a tool if you do not mind getting grease on your hands. Before dawn, the port's talk had already braided Crow's night into 3 versions. In one, he was a Navy hero catching double dealers. In one, he was a thief who stole from thieves. In one, he was a prophet of a devil book on a battered brig. The 3rd version paid the best and therefore travelled fastest. I needed the first 2 to murder the 3rd before breakfast. Job took the key with Merrick and Cups and a loud opinion about dice dens cheating honest sailors. Public, ordinary. The bosun, without being told why, put me on a boat errand for pitch and twine at the Chandler near Miller's Lane, which was either coincidence or the old fence reading the lean of the deck again. I did not ask. I took the errand. Miller's Lane in grey light looked smaller than panic. Blood on a board had already been kicked into a darker stain by someone who preferred tidy commerce. The thick man's warehouse door was shut. A boy sweeping said the thin runner had been marched toward the fort ditch by militia and a clean coat, then somehow not arrived, because somewhere between lane and ditch, the thick man's friends had argued jurisdiction with fists. Crow had run in the confusion. Of course he had. Rats invent exits. Ditch path, the boy said, eyes bright with the coin I had not yet given. He runs like a man with a purse still on him. I gave the coin. I bought pitch and twine like a good errand. I cut through laundry yards toward the fort ditch with my blood already deciding a narrowness. The ditch path boards were still wet with night and neglect. Midway, at the choke where I had played sick, a pale ghost of light line still kissed a piling where someone had kicked free and left a fray. Crow had felt the trip and survived it. Good. Surviving makes men believe they are charmed. Charmed men are easier to aim. I found him under the broken awning where he had sold me with his mouth. Coat torn, eyes bright with almost escaping. When he saw me, he flinched as if I had stepped out of his own scream. You, he said, devil boy. Hand, I said, you made me famous. Fame is a bill. He showed a knife that had seen more meals than fights. I showed empty hands. I told him both buyers wanted him quieter than useful. Clerk had his ring. Thick man had a grudge. Navy Scar had searched my sewing kit and found thread, so his devil book song now sounded like a cornered liar's encore. I told him a skiff at the mangrove edge could take a thin man to a beach where ledgers rot if he swore to stop selling my name. I walked him toward the mangrove edge along boards that narrowed over water the color of bad tea. Job was not here. Witness for the book would have to be the path, the water, the dawn birds, and Crow's own hunger. Claimable field, not his soul, not the town, only the next 10 steps of lying wood and the glass of a man's footwork when fear hurries it. I stopped in the choke, turned as if to point the way, and let him see me prick my thumb on the fid point like a man adjusting a splinter. Blood. I crouched as if checking a loose board, and with my body blocking the canal side, I wrote small on a torn margin scrap I would burn after. Not even full page, a contract the book still tasted through proximity and drop when I pressed the scrap a moment to the leather under my shirt like a seal. Article 8 whispered, "For 1 glass on these ditch boards, hurried feet find the weakest plank." The book heated through cloth. Law leaned local, narrow, mean, possibly enough. I stood and told Crow the skiff was past the bend and I would not walk ahead of a man with a knife. Pride made him take the lead. Pride and hurry. He stepped where night runners step, center fast, and the weakest plank offered itself with the eagerness of a trap that believes in paperwork. Wood spoke a short, ugly sentence. Crow's foot went through to the knee. He yelped, flailed, knife flashing. The board's neighbor, soft with old rot the article had no need to invent, only to advertise, shed its nail heads. Crow pitched sideways toward water, with his hand clawing for my ankle. I stepped back, ordinary struggle showing. I lunged as if to catch him and missed by the honest width of fear. He hit the ditch with a sound like a sack of tools. Brown water closed. He came up once, tangled in his torn coat. I dropped flat and reached like a savior, because saviors have better witnesses if any appear. His hand slapped my wrist. I got a fistful of coat. Then the thick man's voice shouted from the lane end, and the clerk's sharper voice answered from the fort path, both drawn by the yelp, both arriving to a picture that could save me or sink me. I hauled on the coat as if I wanted Crow alive for their questions. The coat seemed ripped along a stitch he had never mended. The current, such as it was, took the rest of him under the board line into the darker suck, where the ditch met the canal's lazy pull. I lay on the boards with torn coat in my hand and blood on my thumb, and the article ticking down in my bones. And when the buyer's men reached me, I was mud and wide eyes and a voice saying, "He ran, he fell, I tried." The clerk stared at the hole in the path. The thick man stared at the water. A militia corporal arriving late stared at me. Someone would dive, someone would drag. Ports recover bodies when bodies are useful. For the moment, they had a live boy covered in ditch and a story that fit greed better than devil books.
"Search the water," the clerk snapped at the corporal. Then, to me, colder, "You are everywhere tonight." "Errand for pitch," I said, and held up the chandler's parcel like a holy object. He ran past. Board gave. I am not his priest. 2 buyers, 1 rope. It had not been rope. It had been rot and hurry and a narrow line of blood law that the ditch would not testify about in court. Clever, if clever means still breathing. Ugly, if ugly means a man dead who might have lived if he had loved silence more than silver. I did not pray. I catalogued. Body may be found. Story may be held. Book may be still secret. Job may be loud on the key with the right dull alibi. Pike still in stone, careful or not. Seed still waiting. The chapter's promise was bleeding toward paid, and the drip might yet attract sharks. They put me on a bench in a room that smelled of damp uniforms and lemon oil used without conviction. Questions came in pairs. What time the errand? Who sent me? Why the ditch path and not the street? Why my thumb bled? Why Crow ran toward me if I was only pitch and twine? I answered like weather. Carpenter's need. Bosun's boat. Shortcut because the street had militia arguing. Splinter from the broken board when I reached. Crow ran because both of you wanted his neck, and he thought a patient's hand might be a softer witness than a warehouse war. I tried to hold him. Seam tore. Water took him. I can still feel the cloth. The scarred master's mate arrived with his pipe cold and his eyes hotter. He listened to the second telling without blinking. Then he said they had pulled a body from the canal grate near the tanner's outflow. Thin man, torn coat, lungs full of ditch, purse empty, a cheap ring not on him, already in the clerk's evidence dish from the night before. No devil book, no articles, only water and bad boards and a life spent selling stairs that went down. The clerk's jaw worked. Inventory closed without profit always tastes like insult. He asked if I expected thanks for attempted rescue. I said I expected to deliver pitch before the bosun invented a new ear injury for me. Someone snorted. Humour in the wrong room is a risk. It worked. The corporal's shoulders dropped a finger. They held me long enough to make the holding feel like power, then released me with a warning not to leave the harbour without word. I walked out into mid-morning glare with mud cracking on my trousers and the book a quiet coal against my spine to ribs home. Job found me at the landing before I found a boat. Carnival gone, face older. Job searched my eyes for the rest and, being Job, did not dig it out with a stick. He bumped my shoulder and said the fruit seller was already telling a version where Crow owed 3 men money and the ditch collected debts. Good. Debt stories starve devil stories if you feed them enough beer. Back aboard, the bosun took the pitch, looked at my mud and said only that pretty hangings start with pretty explanations. I told him my explanation was mud. He almost smiled his hardwood crack and put me on pumps for an hour where everyone could see me suffer ordinary. 4th law, public, necessary. The mate fluttered about Navy letters and company letters and where the dead runners reflected on cargo claims. I told him dead runners reflected on runners. He wanted better philosophy. I gave him a clean splice instead. At the heat hour, I recovered enough solitude to open the black article. Article 8 was already a pale ghost on the page, spent, wording half forgotten by the paper, the way the others had gone. Rebound had not come. No town of forced truth,
No boards attacking random feet. Narrow had saved me. I rested my forehead on the leather and breathed until the meat heart stopped trying to outrun the law heart. Promise of the chapter. Almost paid. Port. Loose tongues. Spies. Almost exposed. Shirt search survived. Snitch handled cleverly, if cleverly includes ditch water and a lie with mud on it. Still alive, still secret enough. Not clean. Clean is for governor's sheets. I did not write thanks. The book does not cash gratitude. I only said without ink that greater decks still waited and I was not done collecting. Afternoon brought a different weather. The thick man sent no one. The clerk sent a note to the mate requiring Crow's last known associates list and received a masterpiece of useless names. Pike, when he managed a second brief stone visit under the tool inventory lie's thin leftover credit, looked at my mud-stained cuffs and nodded once as if an account column had been ruled. Work on breathing, I said. He almost saluted with 2 fingers through the bars, mock and not, and turned back to his pebble game like a man investing in small futures. Rumours of the book thinned by evening, crowded out by a fresher scandal involving a customs officer and a barrel that should have been molasses and was not. Ports replaced their meals quickly. I helped the replacement along by being visible, dull, blistered, and uninterested in magic. Boys who asked if I had pushed Crow got a look that made the question feel expensive. Men who muttered Stormborn got the bosun's work list like a slap. Job sat with me at the rail at sunset and named the sailmaker and the tangled line boy again, plus a third, a quiet cook's helper who hated the mate's bottle more than he loved wages. 3 seeds, maybe 4 if Merrick's tobacco jaw meant loyalty and not just habit. Not a crew yet, a beginning.
Patience remains cradle, I said. Until when? Job asked. Until the agents pay what they will pay and the Navy's eye blinks, I said. Then we walk, on my terms, not a theft of the whole brig, an offer in a room where shares is already a language. He nodded. And if the scar comes back, then we are duller, I said. And if dull fails, we are gone before the second search learns where scripture hides when sewing kits are not enough. Night settled with music from shore and a cleaner conscience than I deserved. I slept harder than the night before and dreamed not of grapnels but of boards, endless boards, each one choosing whom to keep. I woke knowing the ditch had kept Crow and, for now, kept my name from becoming a poster. What the ditch kept, the sea would not ask for. The sea only asked what I would write next when the deck beneath me finally answered to blood and witnesses who chose. I touched the rail in the dark and felt patience answer like a tired animal. Cradle, not throne. Somewhere in the outer roads a schooner still sat with a sick captain and a crew one night from new religion. Somewhere east, wreck silver rumours fattened. Somewhere in the book's hiring coal, article of powder waited for a page and a reason. I breathed, owned it, let it go. The snitch was a closed account in tea-coloured water. The almost had passed by thread and mud and narrow law. Loose tongues still wagged, but they wagged about customs barrels now, and that was as close to mercy as ports offer boys who should have drowned and did not. Leaving a ship is harder than boarding one. Boarding is laws and orders. Leaving is a series of small, honest betrayals that have to look like life. 2 days after the ditch, the company posted wages in part and promises in full. Men cheered thin cheers and immediately owed half to taverns that had been running tabs on their faces. The mate walked taller with a letter that said he had preserved cargo under trying conditions. My name stayed out of the letter because I had asked and because informal lead still included steering ink. The bosun received a written commendation he used to light his pipe, slow, eye contact included. The gunner bit a coin and shrugged. The Navy's eye blinked in the way of offices with too many files. Crow's death settled as accident under pursuit. The clerk hated the settlement and accepted the thrift. The scar came once more to our rail, looked at me, looked at the repaired boatfall, and said boredom was a useful talent. I thanked him as if he had praised my splicing. He left. Attention is heavier than wages. When it lifts, your shoulders remember. That evening I sent Job ahead to the second tavern's back room with the sailmaker, the tangled line boy, and the cook's helper. I followed separate, dull route, watching for clean coats. None clung.
The room was low and brick and smelled of onions stored too long. A single lantern, 4 faces, mine made 5. Patience is a good cradle, I said. She is not a future. Owners own her. Courts own her story. Some of you felt the tilt when the voyage went thin. I will not call that command. I will call it surviving together. Surviving together can become shares if you want dirt that is not already planted with clerks. The sailmaker, older, missing a fingertip to a needle's old crime, asked what deck. Not yet named, I said. There is a schooner in the outer roads with a sick captain and a crew that already dreams division. There may be better. There will be risk. Navy, hunger, rebound if we get stupid with rules we write in blood. I will not dress it. Rules in blood, the cook's helper said carefully. No one left. The lantern ticked. The tangled line boy swallowed audibly and said he was tired of tangled line that never became his. Job grinned, carnival soft, and said seed likes company. The sailmaker asked if I expected them to call me captain. Not until a deck answers, I said, and not if the word makes you lazy. Captain of my breath is already taken. The rest is work and choice. Choice is the only witness I trust more than fear. I did not show the book, witness enough in their leaning bodies, blood enough in my scabbed thumb if a night required ink. Claimable deck still out on the water, not in a brick onion room. But crew is a deck of another kind, and carefully was still the adverb. We spoke logistics like thieves and like craftsmen. Who could quietly gather kit? Who still owed the bosun a debt of pride that would hurt to cut? Who must never be asked? Gunner and bosun remained walls of patience, walls stay. The mate would wake one morning lighter by 5 shadows and invent a story that preserved his letter. I almost wished him luck. Almost is a full word. We left by 1s and 2s. I went last after killing the lantern. In the dark, I touched the book through cloth and felt it warm. Interest payment accepted in intention and chosen witnesses. Toward greater decks, soon. Not empty soon. Soon with names. On the street, Job fell in beside me, as if by accident. You did not tell them about ditch law, he said. I told them rebound, I said. That is the honest spine. Details are for decks and glass hours.
Ashore's night music sounded different when you had already begun to leave it. Less trap, more curtain. We passed the green door without slowing. The clerk's light was on. Ledgers never sleep. Let him write crow accident and patient's dull hands until his wrist ached. My true inventory was walking beside me and ahead of me in separate shadows toward hammocks they would not keep much longer. At the landing, a woman with net calluses stepped from a doorway and spoke without greeting. You closed a mouth that was selling my cousin's name too, she said. I do not owe you. I only say the schooner's captain will die before the new moon if the mate's greed does not kill the crew first. They call her the Petrel, outer roads, yellow waist. Do not thank me. She was gone before thanks could become a chain. The net mender weather finally showed a face and removed it. Ports invent allies the way they invent jobs, temporary and sharp. Petrel, yellow waist, outer roads. I filed the shape beside wreck silver rumors and the book's coal. Patience received us with her harbour creek. I lay in the sailcloth corner and ran the personal laws like beads. Never show the book, still clean enough. Job new. Chosen men would learn by action before page if I could help it. Never write what you cannot survive if it rebounds. Ditch boards had been survivable. A loyalty clause would not have been. Claim a deck before you rule a sea. Soon. Leave ordinary struggle showing. My shoulders still ached from pumps. Good. Do not burn the crew as fuel. 5 names asked, not conscripted. Informal is not invisible. Do not confuse listening with ownership. Even now, especially now. I slept. In sleep, the Petrel's yellow waist brightened until it was a horizon. I woke once to the Navy tender's bell and listened for clean coats on our deck. None. The blink held. For a night, the port of loose tongues chewed other meat. Tomorrow would begin the quiet extraction of kit and courage. The day after might begin a claim. Between them, I would stand my watches on patience like a son who still loves a house he must leave, and I would not spit on her planks on the way out. Cradles deserve better than spit.
They deserve a clean cast-off and a story that lets the remaining men keep their wages and their faces. Shares in a back room, witness of choice. The Deep's hiring notice rustled as if a wind had found it below decks. I grinned at the dark, hid like scripture, and let sleep take the rest of the watch. Stealing yourself from a payroll is a craft. You move kit like you move rumor. Small, boring, never all at once. The sailmaker began mending a private ditty bag that somehow gained a second shirt and a roll of good twine. The tangled line boy, whose name was Tomil when you asked kindly, practiced knots on the foredeck, while a canvas roll under the boat cover grew heavier by a blanket and a tin cup. The cook's helper, Seraph, found reason to carry empty casks ashore and full ones that were not full of what the manifest believed. Merrick chewed and watched, and one night simply had a sea bag that looked like it had always been packed. Job owned nothing, and therefore packed light, which is a kind of wealth. I moved the book's contingencies, sewing kit restored to honest simplicity, second wrap oiled, a false bottom in a small tool crate the carpenter thought was his idea. If the scar returned smarter, he would find tools and disappointment. Scripture stayed on skin when skin was the safest vault, and in wood when wood was emptier of eyes. The boatswain noticed the lean of habits. Of course he did. Fences feel drafts. He stopped me at the main bitts with a marlin spike still warm from work. "You look like a man measuring another ship again," he said. I told him I was measuring the bar and the wind. Old answer, thinner now. He snorted. "When you go, do not take the boys who still need a wall. Take the ones who already walk without my shadow, and do not get hanged in a pretty way." Fourth time. Tradition sealed. He looked away at the navy tender as if it had spoken. "Good," he said. "Spit is for men who never learned who kept them alive." Then he roared at a landsman, and the moment closed like a hatch. The gunner found me later near the galley stack. "If you find a magazine that is yours," he said without preface, "dry powder is a religion, not a suggestion." He told me nothing else. He did not ask for confession. Walls understand doors. The mate remained cheerfully blind in the way of men whose letters have already been sent. He spoke of sailing homeward in a week if caulking held and courts did not invent new appetites. I nodded at the right beats and felt informal lead become a thing I was gently setting down, like a tool returned to a rack before the owner counts. Men still brought me tangled line. I still untangled. I also pointed them to the bosun more often, reweaving the habit away from my hands. Myths starve slower than I like. I starved them anyway. Ashore, Petrel gossip thickened. Sick captain, yellow waist, mate of hers seen drunk in 3 houses, talking shares out of one side of his mouth and loyalty out of the other. Crew restless. A powder cask rolled wrong on her deck last Tuesday, and only luck kept the spark story from becoming a hole in the roads. Luck and damp, someone said. I filed damp beside the gunner's religion and the book's coal. Article of powder, not yet. Soon enough to taste.
Job and I took a bumboat at dusk under the pretense of fruit and looked at her from a polite distance. Petrel sat like a tired bird with good bones, topsails furled messy, watch thin, yellow stripe on the waist dirty but proud. Claimable was not a feeling in the blood yet. It was a shape in the eye. I did not write. I measured sweeps of deck, angles of approach, the way her cable lay, the laugh of a man at her rail who laughed like fear. Job agreed, too quick, which meant he had been ready if I had said yes. Ready is good. Eager can sink skiffs. We bought fruit we did not need and returned to Patience, smelling of oranges and Patience of a different spelling. Night before the planned walk, I visited Pike once more because unfinished columns itch. The sergeant took coin without looking at amounts large enough to remember. Pike had lost the pebble game and won a quieter faith. He said the court dates slipped. He said soft rope songs had fewer singers since the ditch. He said he would not thank me even if arithmetic suggested he should. On deck that final full night, the mate offered me another small bonus for continued loyalty through the homeward run. I took enough to look human and told him I would always pull while I was aboard. While is an honest word that courts cannot prosecute. He heard permanence. I sold him while. Both of us preferred our hearing. I opened the book in the cable tier and ran the chapter aloud, soft. Loose tongues wake, papers that bite,
drink with job, green door clerk, pike in stone, lantern crab, almost the shirt, 2 buyers, 1 rope. What the ditch kept? Shares in a back room, quiet extraction, promise near paid, snitch closed, exposure survived, seed chosen, cradle almost released. Ahead, claim, powder, richer prize, the chance to hang twice if the next narrow line went wide. I did not write the powder article. No magazine yet that answered to my blood. Appetite pressed. I pressed back. Skill first. Deck first. Witnesses who had already sat in onion brick and chosen. On deck again, I stood harbour watch and watched lanterns bloom ashore like a cheap heaven. Teachers' weather remained rumour, a pressure system for other men's fear. Comparison stayed a hook I refused to swallow. I was Calder vain, still collecting, still cloth not crown, informal lead cooling into something I would have to rebuild on wood that had not yet learned my weight. Job joined me without speaking for a long time. Then he said the boys were ready and frightened and pretending neither. Good, I said. Fear keeps hands careful. Only fools board a future grinning the whole way. He asked if I was afraid. I told him I was captain of my breath, and sometimes breath knows more than pride admits. He laughed quiet and left me the rail. Quiet extraction finished in the muscles, if not yet in the morning's act. Kit stowed in harmless places, names aligned. Petrel waiting with her sick captain and her bad powder luck and her yellow waist. Patience creaked, social, unknowing. I put my palm on her rail like goodbye disguised as balance. Cradle, I thought. Thank you. Then I took my hand back before the thought became a speech. Speeches wake watchers, watchers wake ropes. Tomorrow we would walk, then we would claim, in that order, on my terms. Morning came honest and humid, no omens. Omens are for men who need permission. I worked the forenoon as if wages still owned my spine. Splice, haul, laugh once at Merrick's tobacco joke. Untangle a line and hand it back to a boy who was not Tomil, redirecting the habit one more time toward the bosun's shadow. The mate spoke of homeward stores. The carpenter cursed a seam. The gunner sunned a tray of cartridges with religious fuss. Ordinary ship, ordinary day. Under it, 5 shadows timed their bladders, errands, and shore permissions like a single animal with 5 hearts. My shore chit said chandlery and a dentist. The dentist a fiction with a street address Job had paid a man to nod at if asked. I went down the boat with Seraph and a cask that needed coopering, public as laundry. Job and Tomil followed in a later boat with the sailmaker under a story about canvas samples. Merrick walked the long quay route alone because alone was his dialect of trust. A hired skiff waited with an oarsman who had been paid to be blind and mute until the outer roads, then paid again to forget. We loaded low. Yellow waste of petrol was a dirty stripe on the afternoon water when we cleared the last inner hulls. Patience's mast stood behind us among 100 others, harder to pick out already. Good. Mothers should blur when sons leave without slamming doors. Job's shoulder touched mine on the thwart. Seed, he said. Tomil looked green about more than the chop. Sailmaker checked a needle case like a weapon. Seraph watched the navy tender until it shrank to a white chip, then breathed as if breathing had been rationed. Merrick chewed and spat and looked almost bored, which I loved him for. I felt the book warm as river gave way to cleaner water. Sea climate for law returning. Article 1 easy in the lungs. Spent ghosts quiet. Hiring coal bright. Claimable deck no longer abstract. She grew as we pulled. Petrel, schooner, tired bird. Deck space enough for witnesses. Rail enough for blood if blood was required. Magazine somewhere under that deck with damp opinions.
Not yet bored, I told them. First we look like men for hire, not like a disease. Her mate drinks. Her captain dies by rumour. We arrive as medicine and become the body. Sailmaker grunted approval. Medicine is a story that passes centuries. We hooked a long circuit and came upon Petrel from the open side as afternoon softened. Hail, what ship, what need? Their thin watch answered with suspicion and relief braided, the sound of men who hate surprises and hate their current story more. I stood in the skiff and spoke weather flat, hands seeking shares work, heard you might be light, heard your captain's luck turned.
Climbing onto Petrel's deck was a different gravity than patience. Wood under boot that did not know my balance yet. Smell of someone else's bilge and someone else's bad decisions. A man with a mate's coat and a drunk's paws met us with a hand on a pistol he was not steady enough to worship properly. Names, he said. I gave Cal and nothing holy. I gave the others as hands. I said we left a merchant brig tired of promises. I said we could hand, reef, steer, sew, cook, and not sing navy songs. I said shares if shares was the religion, wages if he still pretended otherwise. He flinched at shares spoken plain, then looked at his thin crew and at a closed cabin door that smelled of vinegar and endings, and the flinch became hunger. We stowed kit. We took work before we took arguments. That mattered. Seraph found the galley and made the evening meal taste like someone cared. Sailmaker's needle flashed on a torn staysail. Tomil coiled like I had taught him, neat enough to calm old men. Merrick found the helm and made friends with her weather helm without asking permission of pride. Job stayed near my shoulder and smiled carnival at anyone whose hand drifted too near a knife without cause. I walked the deck once as a new hand should, learning ring bolts and lies. Magazine scuttle forward of the main, cable tier smaller than Patience's, cabin door still closed. When I passed it, I felt no claim yet. Claim is not trespass. Claim is witness and blood and a moment the wood agrees. Tonight might not be that moment. Tonight might be earning the right to stand near the moment without being thrown to the fishes. The mate drank less with strangers watching. Interesting. Maybe he wanted to live long enough to steal cleanly. He asked me if I had heard of storm-born boys and ditch-dead runners. My face stayed puzzled and mildly disgusted at port gossip. He relaxed a fraction. Dull is a passport. I did not take the speech. I took a pump handle that needed leather and worked where they could see shoulders shake. Ordinary struggle. Fourth law on a new deck. When I finally spoke, it was to say the cable looked chewed and the powder hatch smelled damp, and both would kill them faster than a vote. Work first, vote later. A few nodded. The mate looked grateful and threatened at once. Below, alone for a stolen minute in Petrel's cable stink, I opened the book and did not write. I only let the leather taste the new wood through my palms and a pressed page, introduction without contract. Soon I told it. Witnesses aboard, blood ready, deck almost, powder waiting. The hiring coal flared as if the deep approved the address. On deck again, Job caught my eye. Cast off complete. His look said, claim unfinished. I nodded. Patience was a blur of masts in the inner dark. Cradle released without ceremony, without spit, without the mate's letter learning my absence until morning paperwork. By then, the story would be 5 deserters and a schooner that had already been halfway to our religion before we arrived. I breathed sea air that was truly sea again and felt the dealer step back to the table. Fine. I preferred this table. Cards of wind, iron, law, and choice. I kept my grin small and my hands ordinary and my second heart ticking against ribs that had almost been opened by a searching palm in a different night. Cast off without ceremony, on my terms. The yellow waist under my boots still belonged to a sick man and a drunk mate on paper. Paper is a weather system. We had begun to teach this hull a different climate. Ships learn names the way dogs do. Repetition, food, and who stands in the doorway when the storm finds the hatch. By noon the next day, Petrel knew Cal as the hand who found the chewed cable before it became a man overboard story. She knew Job as the smile that arrived with a rammer when a locker argument grew elbows. She knew Seraph as gravy. In sailor terms, that is citizenship. The captain died in the afternoon without theatre. Vinegar smell deepened. The mate came out of the cabin paler and tried to own the moment with a hat in his hands. Men looked at the hat, then at the horizon, then at the pumps, then at me. I hated the predictability and used it anyway. I said we sew him decent and speak later about living. The mate said he was still mate. I said good. Mates keep watches while hands keep wood and water where they belong. Split credit. Living ship. Old arrangement on new planks. That night the gatherer at the mainmast came honest. No pretense of waiting for the dead to rise. The mate spoke of selling Petrel into a quiet creek him scattering. 2 men light scattering. 3 hated leaving a hull that could still bite. My 5 stood like a quiet fence without looking like a fence. I let others talk until talk frayed. Then I gave weather.
Creek scatter makes 5 small hunts for the Navy instead of 1 hull with teeth, I said. Wages under a new owner make you someone else's slow death. Shares on a deck you already stand on make you a problem that shoots back. I do not promise glory. Glory is a beard's weather and a governor's headache. I promise narrow rules we can survive, powder kept dry enough to matter, and no bottle at the binnacle. Eyes flicked to the mate's pause. He flushed. Someone laughed the fear laugh and then stopped laughing and started nodding. The sailmaker said, mild, that he had sewn for owners and preferred sewing for a split he could count. Tomil said he wanted line that stayed his after the coiling. Simple wants, strong wants. The mate's pistol hand twitched. Job's body angled without theatre. I showed empty hands and the 4th law's shake still in my shoulders from the day's pumps. If you want a throne fight tonight, I said to the mate, you will get a corpse deck and a patrol curious about gunfire. If you want to live rich enough to drink on a beach that is not a grave, you stand mate under articles we write together and stop pretending the cabin hat makes water fresh. It was a hard sentence. It risked rebound of pride. Pride is its own deep law. He stared. I breathed. Article 1 kept my lungs boringly steady. Steady unnerves drunks. He put the pistol away because the faces around him had already voted with their feet's direction. Slight lean toward the pumps and the powder hatch and the new voice. Informal lead, transplanting. We did not call me captain. I forbade it aloud. Light, not theatrical. Temporary spokes and working watches, I said. Captain is a word for when the deck has signed in more than habit. Men rolled eyes and obeyed the shape anyway. Names lag reality. Reality was 5 seeds plus 6 of Petrel's restless and 2 fence-sitters and a mate swallowing a new coat of sobriety that itched. Below later, I took the book to the magazine scuttle and did not open the hatch yet. I only stood witness with Job and the gunner Petrel still had, a short man named Cole who loved dry casks the way other men loved saints. Cole showed me damp stains with shame and fury. Bad stowage, bad luck, bad mate. I felt the powder weather gather like pressure before a squall. Article of powder, not a wide wish, a narrow future. Not tonight, I told the book under breath. Tonight we hold. Tomorrow we inventory. Soon we write if the wood agrees. Job heard the tone, if not the words. Powder, he said. Powder, I agreed. And a richer prize than patience's leftover indigo if the wreck silver talk is even half fat. Petrel has legs if we stop treating her like a coffin with sails. On deck, the mate found me and tried gratitude again. Same embarrassment as another ship's mate in another life. Holes sink ships, he said. I said, then stop being a hole. He almost swung. Then he nodded, shamed into usefulness. Useful shamed men are temporary allies. I accepted temporary. I slept in a hammock that smelled of someone else's sweat and woke to a dawn patrol sail on the horizon that made every spine sing one thin note. We ran a merchant's posture and a thin crew's luck. I sang no article, skill and dull flags and the sea's ordinary indifference. The patrol nosed, bored, turned away toward juicier silhouettes. When she shrank, Petrel's deck exhaled. Men looked at me again. I looked at the chewed cable we had already replaced and let the work own the credit. By evening, Cole and I had the magazine's worst casks marked and the dry ones higher. My hands were black, ordinary struggle showing. Under the black, the thumb scab itched with appetite. Narrow line waiting. Witnesses ready. Deck learning my name in the dogway. Food and doorway and repetition. Loose tongues of the port were a smear of smoke astern. Crow was tea-coloured history. Pike was stone arithmetic. Patience was a cradle rowing her paperwork homeward lighter by 5 shadows. The scar might still invent a second search for a boy and a book. Let him search empty hammocks. Secrecy had moved house. I stood at Petrel's rail and spoke the paid promise inward like a closed account. Port of loose tongues entered, survived, snitch cleverly closed, almost exposure lived through by thread and mud and narrow ditch law. Men chosen, cradle left clean, new wood under boot, promise paid, cliff open, richer prize, powder article,
a schooner that might become the first deck to truly answer if I wrote true and paid true and did not burn these choosers as fuel. Teach's weather still far, a rumour with vanity. My weather closer, quieter, meaner, mine. Job brought 2 biscuits and tossed me the softer, habit from patience transplanted. I ate and watched the dark water take our wake, and thought of boards that choose, and magazines that forgive, and the deep still hiring. Petrel learned a name, not captain, Cal. For now that was the right size. Size can grow when powder is dry and witnesses hold, and the next prize's flag comes over the horizon fat with someone else's certainty. I touched the rail. Not goodbye, hello, claimable, soon. Cole believed in powder the way I believed in narrow lines. We recognized each other without a handshake.
We spent a full day on Petrel's magazine like surgeons who know the patient is both child and bomb. Wet staves marked, dry casks crowned high, slow match counted and kept from fools. The mate tried to supervise and learned to hand tools instead. Job ran bodies and tempers clear of the hatch. Tomil fetched and coiled and did not drop anything that could make a spark story. Merrick stood watch topside with his bored jaw and a loaded musket that looked accidental. I could have written then. The urge was a taste like metal. Article of powder gathering phrases in the back of my mouth. For one glass, damp fails. For one watch, spark sleeps. For this deck, magazine yields only to named hands. All possible, all hungry, all needing the right hour, the right witness circle, the right blood, and a claim that would not rebound into a schooner afraid of its own stores. Dry casks first, I told Cole when he asked why I kept stopping short of miracles. Skill first, I told myself. Ink later. Still the religion. Tested in ditch water and sew-in kits and open sea grapnels. Port had not revoked it. Petrel would not either, if I stayed precise. Cole spat black and said, "Religion needs teeth when a fat prize runs." I asked what fat he believed. He jerked his chin east. Talk of a packet with wreck silver leftovers and a Navy escort that was late by a day if the rumors had guts. Late escorts are windows. Windows close. He wanted teeth before the window. So did I. Teeth without dry powder are just smiles. We worked until the magazine smelled less like apology and more like readiness. When we locked the hatch under Cole's word and my private memory of gunners who name hands, I felt the book tick hard enough to count as applause. Not yet. Soon. On deck, the sailmaker showed me a set of colours that could be honest or dishonest, depending on the halyard's mood. Petrel had lived near lines. Good. Shares religion often begins as privateering theatre and forgets to stop. I did not moralise. Morals are weather. I asked if the cloth could stand a prize crew's eyes. He said the cloth could stand anything if the men under it did not flinch. Flinch is sown deeper than flags. Near evening, a bumboat found us with fruit and news, the port's tongue elongated over water. Patience had posted deserters, 5 names, mine among them, storm-born still stuck like tar, a reward small enough to insult and large enough to interest hungry alleymen. The scar had been seen at the green door. Pike had gone silent as a strategy. Crow remained dead without promotion to martyr. The fruit seller now sold a version where the ditch demon ate runners who priced weather too high. Myths drift. Let them drift away from my ribs. Job read my face as I listened. We left at the right hour, he said. That night I called a short circle of the ones who had chosen first. Onion brick men and coal. Lantern low. Deck under bare feet. I pricked my thumb in plain sight and let them see blood without theatre. Then I opened the black article. Some flinched. Cole whispered a saint. Tomil looked sick and stayed. Job had already seen and only nodded. Sailmaker leaned in like a man reading a contract. Merrick chewed slower. This is the hire, I said. Deep law. Local sea and ship try to enforce what we write in blood if the field can take it. Limits. Witness, blood, claimable deck. Broken clauses rebound. Secrecy or hang twice. I will not write your souls. I will not write wide wishes. I will write narrow teeth when skill runs out. If that is too much devil for your gravy, go. Skiff on the painter. No knife in the back required. No one stood to leave. Fear stayed.
Choice stayed beside it, which is the only pairing I trust. I did not write a clause yet. Showing was the first claim's cousin. Witness bonded without ink. I closed the clasp, bound the oilcloth, set the packet home. Hands shook ordinary where they could see. Fourth law even now. Cole said, rough, that if I wrote powder, he wanted his name in the witness line. I told him witness is standing and holding, not fame on a page. He nodded, accepting the demotion of ego for the promotion of dry death to enemies. After the circle, I stood alone at the helm for a stretch and felt Petrel answer the wheel with a different mouth than Patience. Younger, meaner, less forgiven by years of honest cargo. She could be a first true deck if I paid her right. Claimable was becoming a pressure in the soles of my feet. Soon, the word had weight. A sail showed itself at first light on the eastern edge. Not the late escort, not yet. A merchant fat in the beam and proud in the paint. Too soon, too close to port's navy paint. I let her go and hated the letting and loved the discipline. Discipline is an article you write without blood until the day blood makes it real. Men grumbled. I grumbled with them to show my mouth worked like theirs, then pointed at the magazine and the cable and the colors and the drills Cole had begun with 2 guns that still rolled true. Work made grumble into sweat. Sweat made a crew. A crew made a claimable field more honest than a stolen hour. Dry casks first, then teeth, then the window east if it still hung open. Port noise was behind us. Powder math was under our feet, waiting for a thumb and a sentence that would not rebound into a crater where a schooner had been. I slept a little in the forenoon heat with the book under my palm, and woke to Job saying the eastern talk had thickened. Packet, silver taste, escort late by rumour's clock, Petrel's legs ready if her people were. I sat up tasting metal and orange peel ghost from a port I had already outlived. I went back to the magazine hatch and laid my palm on the wood. Soon, I said, and this time the wood felt like it heard through more than metaphor. Claim beginning, name learning, powder listening, dry casks first. The rest would be written when the prize's sale made the writing cheaper than regret. There is a smell that is not yet smoke and not still peace. Powder on the wind, possibility with a fuse. We caught it on a morning when Petrel's repaired cable and raised dry casks had made her crew stand like people who owned their next hour. Lookout's voice cracked on the second call. Sail. Then the shape resolved out of the eastern haze. Fat in the beam, proud in the paint. Too hurried for a coastwise drudge and too alone for a man who truly expected his escort on time. Rumour had guts after all. Windows open, teeth required. I did not cheer. Cheering spends breath you may need for law. I sent Cole to the magazine with his named hands. I sent the sailmaker to the colours. I sent Job along the guns with the calm that keeps elbows from inventing sparks. I took the mate by the upper arm, gentle as a hook, and asked if he would rather be sober rich or drunk dead. He chose the first with his eyes and the second's memory with his mouth's tightness. Helm, I said. Follow my weather voice when the numbers get narrow. He nodded too fast, familiar tilt on foreign wood, informal lead, transplanted, flowering whether I named it captain or not. Men looked at me. The word waited behind their teeth. I shook my head once, light. Work first, names after. The book burned against my ribs like a coal that had smelled the prize's hold from a league off. Hiring notice bright, greater decks, greater articles, appetite as tiller, both hands on the real one and one thumb ready for ink. I went below for the 30 breaths I could afford. Job at the hatcher's fence. Opened the black article on a gun tackle shelf with Cole's powder black already on my wrists as witness stamp. Deck under feet. Men above choosing this hull's next hour. Blood from a thumb that had learned the price of wide wishes in a ditch and on Patience's night of knives. Not yet the full powder commandment, not until the range closed and skill showed where it broke. But the page wanted a first tooth for a claimable schooner that had learned my name in gravy and dry casks and a dead captain's quiet. Article 9, I wrote, slow, each word weighed like shot. On this deck, until the glass dies, hands I have set to the guns load true and hold fire until my word. Narrow, local, paid. Cole's breath at my shoulder a second witness. Job's feet on the ladder a third. The book drank. Heat ran through the planks in a way only I could admit, and everyone could feel as a sudden steadiness in the wrists of men ramming home. Not a miracle parade, a professional calm with a secret spine. Leave enough ordinary struggle showing. I ran back on deck with black hands and a shout about coins and elevations that any good gunner's mate could have owned. Petrel leaned into her legs. The fat packet tried a flag game and a heel toward shallows that did not love her draft. I sang ranges like depths. The mate's mouth echoed orders half a breath behind. Duet rebuilt. First gun spoke under my word and Cole's religion. Iron finding timber with a sound like a ledger slamming shut. Second gun followed. Smoke. Powder true on the wind. No damp betrayal. Skill and yesterday's labour and a narrow clause braided so tight a court would go cross-eyed. The packet's return fire woke the sea beside us. Splinters. A man screamed and became Job's problem and Seraph's cloth. Ordinary blood. Ordinary cost. Fourth law paid in public. I did not write away death. I wrote teeth. Teeth bite both ways if you get stupid. I stated precise. Board or strike, Job yelled through smoke. Range and rake, I said. Make her captain love his lungs more than his cargo. We did. Petrel was not a frigate. She was enough. The packet's paint lost its pride. A spar lurched. Someone on her quarterdeck waved the wrong kind of white, the kind that means living preferred. I held fire on the word and felt Article 9 tick down in my bones. Glass running, load true still holding until the last useful shot, then fading like spent weather. Rebound did not come. No guns turning on our own toes. Narrow had saved us again. What remained was boarding math, prize crew math, silver smell already imagined in the hold, Navy escort still a blank place on the horizon that might fill with sails at the worst breath. The port's promise lay paid in the wake behind us. Loose tongue survived, snitch closed in ditch water, shirt search endured, men chosen, cradle left clean, new deck answering. Ahead, the powder promise opened in the smoke, article born, richer prize under our guns, the escort's late clock still ticking like a second fuse. I stood on Petrel's rail with a grappling line in honest hands and the black article cool again undercloth, fed, attentive, ready for the next line when skill broke. Men waited on my mouth. The mate waited. Cole waited black-faced and bright-eyed. Job waited with his carnival grin sharpened to a knife.
Calder vain. Cal to the careless. 19. Should have drowned. Did not. Captain of my breath. Not yet poster. Not yet fleet. Holder of a book that wrote back when paid true. Deserter on someone's list. Spokes on a schooner that had learned his name. Boarding soon. Silver maybe. Hang twice if the horizon's blank filled too fast with clean paint and cleaner guns. I grinned at the smoke like luck, hid like scripture, and gave the word to close. Powder on the wind, prize under iron. Escort still a rumor with teeth somewhere behind the haze. The deep had hired me. I was still collecting, on my terms, with witnesses who chose and a deck that had finally begun to answer, and the next commandment already itching in my scabbed thumb for the hour when powder alone would not be enough, and the article would have to grow meaner, wider by a finger, still narrow enough to survive the snapback. Loose tongues had not hanged me. The ditch had kept its receipt. Petrel carried us toward a fatter ledger line. I breathed in, owned it, breathed out. Then I jumped first onto a prize deck that did not yet know what law had arrived with the smoke, and behind me came men who preferred shares to wages, and under my shirt the second heart of scripture ticked hired patience toward greater decks, greater risk, and the article of powders fuller writing still waiting on the other side of someone else's surrendered flag.